Welcome to the live stream, ladies and gentlemen. I am your host today, Bumpy McSquigums. I apologize for our late start. I'm joined by Cupogoodness, Tiny Disaster. We are the Indie Brothers, and we are here to make your developer lives hopefully a little bit better with our game industry discussions. How are you doing today, fellow companions?
Been a chaotic one so far, but doing okay.
It has
Yeah,
been
what a
little bit
week!
crazy.
What a week that it's only Wednesday, but it's been a week.
It has, well, it's been half a week, but yes, I know what you mean. I got you.
Nope, it's been a whole week.
It feels like it. It feels like 3 weeks.
It's been like an October for sure. Like this has been a very busy month.
Yes, and we have spooky times coming at the end of the month. So since we're a bit delayed, I think we should just dive right on in. So today we're going to be talking about industry pitfalls, what we've learned so far. And one of the things that we've learned so far is that even getting a job in the industry at times can be quite a challenge. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. So stuff like basically standing out in competition when everybody's trying to get a job in the industry, right? How can you stand out and be different, showcase your skills maybe in a different way, or what an employer is looking for, stuff like that. And then we're going to dive into a couple of other topics, and we'll finish off with something a bit more what we do and kind of advice more specifically, as opposed to kind of more general industry-wide discussion. Are you going to make a cup?
Water, wrong pipe. We're good.
You sure? We're good? All right. So, competition is fierce. How exactly would you stand out, or how can you stand out as an individual to an employer? So, I guess with Cup being one of the co-founders of the Indie Brothers, what do you look for in people that come looking for a job?
Right. I mean, like, right off the bat, the first thing that comes to mind is just like initiative. To see someone actually interested. We do get occasional sort of out of the blue submissions, but they're often, filled with like red flags, or they might just not kind of know the right way to approach asking for a job. But it's interesting, like you would stand out from your competition a lot just by having initiative and going to seek out a job, like versus
waiting to see one that's there type situation.
Yeah, or just saying, yeah, I'm gonna wait for something to come my way. That's a common pitfall, I think, of anybody trying to get a job, is saying, oh, I'll just kind of wait for the right opportunity or that kind of thing, and then you just never get your engine started, so to speak. So I like to see. I don't need you to have like a bunch of AAA experience, or even necessarily the commercial game experience.
Right.
But if I see that you put in work on some sort of project in the past, games related or otherwise, it gives me a sense of what you've been able to accomplish, your work ethic. You can't judge everything off of a product necessarily, like an end product or something like that. But for instance, with you, Bumpy, I was able to refer to your output on YouTube, for instance, as something that I'm going, okay, this person doesn't have any issue with output, grinding out, whatever the case. I'm not going to try to look for people who are like, yeah, use me until I'm totally just off, just like I've crunched you to death. That's not what we're doing here. But
yeah, and I remember I sat on my hands for a while too, hoping that the perfect opportunity would arise, and it never really did. So it was like, well, I'm just gonna start looking around and see what I can see, because I was going crazy where I was at. So yeah, I guess I did take the initiative in that sense as well.
Right, and there's a point where you probably were. There's just like phases of that process you were going through, and you got to a point where you were kind of fed up with the current results of what has had happened for you to that point, and you said, I'm gonna make my own luck, change things up, and actually try to make something occur proactively. So it just that alone is a great way to start. Obviously, it depends on the job, right? Like if we're looking for like a specialist, like or someone who's just coming on as like an entry level that wants to help us with email responses, sending codes out, things like that. There's different requirements there, right? Prerequisites, so to speak, that we're looking for. But one of the biggest things, no matter who you are on the team, I'm looking for is someone who is able to like play nice with others, like be compatible, work with others on the team, and also it's like I kind of describe it as like it's like an indie studio, or maybe even indie brothers with our company. It's kind of like having being part of a high school group project team, except for no one sucks.
Yeah.
Is the idea. Like everybody has to actually pull their weight like they're supposed to, and they do. And this would have been a beautiful thing to actually have occur in like middle school or high school when you had group projects. If like everybody actually pulled their weight, you would actually see in that process how enjoyable that experience can be. Versus I had to do everything because I know Teddy and Ricky weren't going to get it done. Sorry, Teddy and Ricky's out there. That was no offense to those names, but like just kind of pulling it out. So you get into that situation, you want to make sure that the person that I'm hiring is going to pull the weight that we are going to, ask them to carry. And everybody's got different weights, right? Like it's not necessarily uniform or anything like that. I've learned that in certain hires when I feel like, maybe some people would have gone, oh, they're not doing what I want them to do. They're not like working out for me. It's like, okay, so do you get rid of them at that point, or is there something wrong on my end? Like I'm not like putting them in the best position to succeed at the job. And so you have to have that. I think there's that kind of like thought and stuff. So, because I feel like with Indie Brothers now more than ever, we found everybody's in the right spot, so to speak. Yeah. Everybody's in their right area, and to be valuable, right? To be valuable to the country, to the company, and to the country.
The world.
Yeah, exactly. Contribute to your world. But yeah, so it's really, to me, obviously skill set, the prerequisites of the job requirement, those cannot be glossed over. But I also wouldn't like necessarily see a bunch of prerequisites that I was like, whoa, this is not way beyond, but this is like, hey, they're asking for things that I don't necessarily fulfill 100%. I wouldn't let that stop you from applying for a job, if that makes sense. Like, I think it's really important to still apply for jobs that you think, given the prerequisites, I might not have the best chance to make it, but I feel like I have something to offer this company. I feel like I have something to bring to the table. And so I'm going to reach out to them anyway. I'm going to send them this. I might even include a cover letter letting them know, hey, I know I can read that I'm not necessarily like perfect prerequisites for filling the prerequisites for this job, but I still think that I'm one of the best candidates out of your pool based on ABC, and you can go on what your value is. You want to say something, Tiny Disaster?
Just this is advice you see a lot in the like women in gaming kind of forums and stuff, because like on a not just this industry scale, the percentage for like men usually apply as long as they have like 50%. It might even be lower, whereas women usually don't apply unless they have like 90 or 100%. So it's one of those like gaps in the industry of like, I don't know, men are just socialized to be like, no, we got this. Who knows? But
I think that's kind of it's also like a status quo thing. Like there's a lot of what we're going to talk about later with this is that there's a lot of powers that be, and not just people, but just the way things work and the way it just sort of has formed over the last, the decades that it's formed, that it's really hard to change things, and it has to be actively, worked on as an entire, at least a great percentage of the industry to make these changes and actually make them legitimate and keep them that way and actually make those changes healthily. Like you said, it's like this thing where it's just this natural belief that if you're a person of color or if you're a woman or LGBT, etc., that you just think in your head, I have to nail these prerequisites that much more than like a white male. Like, and again, it's not something naturally everybody's thinking about, but that is the status quo of what you just said. Like that's a fact that people that there's this perception that you have to do that based on who you are. So obviously, like, that's not something that's going to be something that you have to kind of parse yourself for who you are, and and kind of keep in mind that's going on. It is very much still, as we talked about before, an industry full of white males, led by white males, and until we get some people of other races and of other, just other diverse backgrounds and such, it's always going to be that these like status quos that we have to kind of break down and aggressively attack. I know we're getting that's
yeah. We'll get to that topic later, because I definitely have more on standing out, especially like social media is a great way. Because as much as everyone hates the idea of networking, and I hate it in my soul, of like getting to know other people is how you should be thinking of it instead of networking, because that's when you're going to hear about opportunities. That's right. When you'll get an in that a job is coming up before it's posted for everybody to see. So making friends, using social media, just being involved in the community is such a great way to put yourself ahead of everyone who's just kind of lurking and waiting for their moment.
Yeah, it's a real pitfall, and this is like kind of like tangential, but it's a nice mention that you mentioned this. We don't have this on our notes or anything, but it is a pitfall to fall into the idea that networking has to be like all business, which really shouldn't be at all. When you network, well, at least the approach that I use that has worked for me is you have no expectations from the other side. Like, you're not like, oh, I'm networking to try to get something from this individual. That is a bad approach that usually, to me, that will usually lead you to, dead ends, or people being like, you're kind of being a little pushy or aggressive, and I'm not interested in working with you, or something like that.
And I think people underestimate, like, as much as so many people hate networking, there's also so many people bombarding everyone at the top of the industry with DMs that so very clearly read as, I want something from you. This is why I'm reaching out. So they get those all the time and can smell it a mile away of what that interaction is going to be. So it's just not a way to stand out.
So to avoid that pitfall, networking should be more about having a conversation with a mutual, possibly a mentor, given the situation, given the relationship that you're having with this individual. And then at the end, if it makes sense to mention that you do this and that, within the conversation, make sure you put out there what you do and how you might be able to work together at some point, but never ever, say it in a way that feels like they have to then respond to you on the spot about it, or say something like that. It really should be something in passing that's like, hey, if you ever want to work together, I've had some projects that I think I'd love to show you, that kind of thing. Again, just sort of like an offer like that, as opposed to a demand. An offer over a demand is probably the best situation in the networking situation. And of course, that shouldn't be the main goal or subject matter that you're talking about most of the time. It's a bit tricky, but you can see it, like you said, you can spot it really clearly when someone is networking and they have, a predetermined goal in mind. And it's really off-putting when people start picking up on that, for sure.
You can tell when people aren't interested in you, but are interested in what you can provide for them.
Yeah.
And no one wants to be friends with that.
No, it's not. It feels bad, because it makes you feel like you're just some sort of, like thing to be taken advantage of, as opposed to an actual person.
Yeah, and that's in terms of like telling people what you can do, is another great way to use social media, because it's a platform to show people what you can do. So if you're working on demos or your own project, or just say you do 3D art and are just mucking around with it and have something you're proud of, you show social media and people will know, and people will have you in the back of their minds as you're building those relationships. That it's a great place to like tell people what you're up to, just because, and then people will be aware of what you do.
Yeah, the evolution of humans and how we interact with social media is very interesting to me. I remember, like when Facebook started in college for me, that was like when I was in college, and it was very much like, you want to be, cool in yourself, and not like too overstated, and not too needy, and not putting yourself out there too much. And then over the last several years, I feel like I've kind of had my own personal revelation about it, but I mean, it's probably always been like this to some extent, but I'm getting that feeling more and more that it's like, listen, social media exists to be, like wanting attention, to seek attention, to get feedback, to get, people to look at your stuff. It's not something where you can, you don't need to be meek on social media. You don't need to be like, well, I really shouldn't share this, or it's not something that I feel like is the perfect post or that kind of thing. It's like if you just follow people's Twitter feeds or Instagram, etc., or TikTok, people are putting themselves out there and calling for their attention to themselves all the time. That's not a sin. That's not a sin within the arena of social media, especially. That's what everybody else is doing, and a lot of people are succeeding at. And if you're saying, well, I'm not really someone who likes to call attention to myself, I understand. I totally get that. But there is a game that has to be played here. No pun intended, but there is like a game that you have to play in this industry in terms of, it would be valuable to me to establish, myself or my company or whatever as a brand or as an individual, kind of establish a persona for that and give something that people can kind of tie back to the product, or say like, this is the person who works on this game, or that kind of thing. That's really, I think that's a big valuable thing that a lot of people miss out on. And I understand why sometimes, right? I understand that if you're a developer that feels like this is just not me, not for me at all, I'm not going to do it. I get it. And it's just that it's going to be a little bit harder necessarily. It very well is likely going to be harder to, to stand out, find the attention, to find the people who are, looking to hire you. I'm bleeding back into like making games and all that kind of stuff, but just looking for jobs and etc. If you put yourself out there, if you show that you're working on your own personal projects, we talked about this before, passion projects, free projects, things that you can do in your extra time, and put out there, that's going to give you more opportunities and more looks from people that, may reach out to you casually, may reach out to you more professionally at some point. You never know. But it only takes that little bit of exposure to start the snowball rolling and getting those leads started.
Any other thoughts on this?
It's actually a pretty complex topic that I'm sure we could talk an hour about. So we should probably keep it rolling.
Yeah, I like in getting into this topic of industry pitfalls. Like, we don't have to solve all the industry pitfalls. It's really just kind of acknowledging what things can be really difficult within the games industry. So
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, we don't have all the answers. It's all tricky stuff.
Yeah, my solutions are mostly mitigations, right? They're not necessarily full solutions to the situation, but rather how to mitigate some of the problems to some degree.
It's true. There's other things that I don't know. I've always felt like I've always worked with groups of people or teams or what have you, all throughout, except like one job. But essentially, it's just group interviews are a weird thing. I don't think I ever thought that would be a thing, and then like seeing it in action, it's real strange. There's just so many little things, like just be bold, don't go into an interview. You don't have to be like super confident crushing the person's hand or what have you, but don't be meek and shy and hiding, from the, somebody's like, all right, who wants to get this thing started? Like, a group interview was a weird thing, but it was also a good thing to see because, the last job that I had before this, I went in because I needed to get some work somewhere, and it wasn't necessarily my first choice, but I went there and I was just basically surrounded by a bunch of, high school students, maybe university students, and none of them were comfortable at all. It's just weird, having, been at that level, and then as you get older and older, you're just like, you know what, I'm here, I'm myself, they need to get the ball rolling, just step in, start getting it rolling, and you stand out. It's like, okay, they have the confidence to move forward.
That awkward at that age as well. But it's learning that you have something to offer as well, and it's not just you trying to win them over. You want to make sure it's a good fit for you too. Like, it really is a two-way street, but it can feel very much not.
Right, and when you're younger especially, you don't think about how being yourself is an advantage. You want to try to fulfill the roles that they're expecting of you, and oh, there's an expectation that I act like this or that. Actually establishing yourself as who you are right off the bat is going to be really long-term beneficial to you, even if you don't work it out with the person that you're trying to get the job with or something. Obviously, if you have an abrasive personality and you find that out through your process, you might want to make some adjustments.
Yes.
But if just being yourself if just being yourself doesn't work out for every single person, that's going to happen. I feel like this is also a good social media tip. Being yourself is so much better than just being something fake or manufactured. And I know that there are probably examples of fake and manufactured accounts that get to the trillions and stuff, and I good on them. But that's not necessarily the end goal of what we're doing here. We're not trying to, go into the stratosphere on social media for no apparent reason. We have a product, we have individuals that represent those products that we have out there, and that's kind of how we're going about it. And I find that the more that you participate in social media as you yourself, the more people that you start to that start to see you for that, and not just, a series of tweets about your product or, things like that. And it humanizes you. And all of a sudden, that's where more your community can start filtering in from, is that kind of stuff.
You'll find the right audience or the right job, as opposed to just the fastest you can come up with.
Definitely.
So my final takeaways from this, from what I experienced was, be yourself, but be comfortable being yourself. Like, just accept who you are, go in and do that, but be polite and respectful. That's if you're super, you're cursing all the time, that might be part of who you are, but there's a business side of things, and then there's your free time that you have to make that differential.
Yeah, classic read the room situation, right? Like if you feel like you're in a room where that's allowed, then that's fine. If you feel like that you're the only person that's doing that in the room, then read that and maybe pull it back a little bit, right? When I say read the room, I don't even mean the actual room. I mean in a chat, in a chat group or an email thread, etc. Make sure that you're not, while still being yourself, like you said, staying within the confines of what has been established in that conversation, and not just being like going to places where you could offend somebody, or somebody could be put off by what you're saying, etc.
All right, so moving from there to the next issue, and this is one, again, more for, it's definitely an industry-wide issue. It's probably a worldwide issue, if we're going to be honest. And it's something, again, the employers need to really get through their heads that this is a problem and it needs to be addressed, and that's diversity issues. There's just a very large lack of diversity, which, despite Ron Burgundy telling us it's an old wooden ship, it's not. Sorry, I saw that recently, and it's one of those lines that cracked me up. Diversity really, as much as people want to make jokes about it, or, it's just, it's everywhere. It's just a very wide-reaching lack of diversity. It's, as you like to state, it's white men everywhere, and there's no women, there's no people of color, and it's straight men, there's no gay, lesbian, or anything else. It's just, you have this norm that everyone considers, and it's wrong. Like, why pass up somebody who's equally or even better qualified because they're different than you? I mean, it leads to a tremendous amount of, well, just sameness, right? Your product is not going to benefit from that. So, I mean, I know you have a whole bunch of notes on this, Cup, and you have a lot of ideas as well. Tiny Disaster, so take it away.
So many thoughts. But the first one that comes to mind is that it's natural for people to hire other people that are like-minded or the same as them. That's something that's been like kind of recorded since like the beginning of history. So that again is like decades, if not centuries, of
something ingrained,
of something that's been ingrained, right, established, that is now trying to be upended, and has been trying to be upended for longer than just now. But it's much more of a open discussion at this point, that as opposed to people getting basically shouted down and saying, no, you can't even bring this up, which has happened in the past. There are and have been for a long time now, but especially in the the last several years, there are a lot of like heroes, people that are like willing to push through into this industry despite knowing that it's a white male dominated industry, and they're like, I don't care, I'm still going to push forward, I'm still going to get the jobs that I think I deserve, I'm going to get paid the amount I believe I'm going to deserve, and now I'm going to spread that word out to everybody that I am getting that done. That's this kind of stuff that's making one of the things that's making kind of these changes occur, because just like a lot of things, people are, whether it's what, I mean, there's a natural status quo to it, but a lot of people are in 2021 are just kind of fed up with it, and they're done, seeing the same thing over and over. It's almost like watching, I don't want to call anybody out in particular, but it's almost watching some like big company like Disney sort of just blah out, because they just don't have anything else to offer, because it's just the same kind of content all the time. And to be fair, Disney has pushed into diversity over the last couple of years, or at least perceivingly has done so. But I know a lot of places that represent diversity have also sort of fought back on that, because they're like, your representation is poor. Your representation is not something that we feel is coming from actually, our side. It's rather just some sort of fabrication that you made up on your side.
The example that comes to mind there is, have you both seen Endgame?
Yes,
the like women superhero all get together in the battle kind of thing, whereas women were all like, you just needlessly killed our token woman superhero. Sorry, spoilers. And then you gave us this like, here, women. So it's that kind of thing.
It was kitsch. It was really poorly done. And it's like nobody in the room was able to say, hey, everyone, let's not do this. Like, let's not do something so like just so patronizing, essentially. Like, and it was literally like the movie. They were like, time out, let's do this thing. Time in. You're like, this makes no sense for this movie whatsoever in the first place, let alone getting into like the diversity or like the issues that you brought up about like the representation where it wasn't necessarily asked for or needed at all. Like, and so it's complicated, right? Like people are trying to make attempts earnestly, and people are trying to make attempts sort of
visually almost like, hey, look at what I did, right?
Like a facade. A lot of like major companies right now are going, oh, diversity's hot. Oh, they really, like we got to push into this and stuff like that. They're not doing it because
actual change, right?
They're not interested in actually like it's just the hot thing right now, and they're going, well, people will flock to us more, or not, at least not disparage us. And then there's other companies like that have put their flag in the ground and maybe the wrong side of history. Like they're like, all right, well, we'll double down on this. And I don't want to get into any specifics, but it's weird what's political nowadays. Because it's like this feels very humanitarian, a lot of the issues we're discussing, and not political necessarily. Now I know humanitarian issues can be political, but that happens all the time, and that's one of the things that it's kind of the wheel that you have to break. The old Game of Thrones reference or whatever. Like there's a wheel turning right now that has to be broken, essentially, like, and remade, because you can't just alter it or change it and stuff. So this is causing a lot of people to freak out, right? Like a lot of people that have already been in power, for X amount of years. It's like they feel like they're being stripped of their power, where it's like, that's not what's actually happening. We're just trying to level a playing field here, people. And so a lot of people are really touchy about that. It really depends on like the circles you hang in. If you hang in certain circles on Twitter, you would think, hey, this diversity thing is making a lot of progress, and we're seeing a lot of developments that tell me that this is heading in the right direction, and it's true to some extent, But they're also blips on the radar, totally, like as in like little tiny blips where you think maybe that's something. Oh, that's a big thing that's happened, and then like you said, Tiny Disaster posted a photo of a 2021 AAA development team, and it is, I believe, 100% white male, if not very, very, very close to that. So, again, it's not to say that like there aren't, okay, the circumstances that would be to make that happen, that's a problem. Like, even if everybody was totally just not trying to make that happen, right? Even if everybody was in earnest and making a good effort to have a nice, diverse team, when that's the end result, you have a problem with the process. Like there are some, what is it called? Systemic issues here, right? Like at the core that we have to kind of investigate. And that gets back to, like you said, or like we started. I know we're going along on this, so I'll try to wrap it up. But like, it goes back to, it's easier to hire people who like look like you and sound like you, and et cetera, et cetera. And it's actually it's more of a challenge to go out there and hire someone who may challenge your views, who may have completely different views than you, and those are valuable to bring to the table of your company, of your group, etc. Go ahead, Tiny Disaster. I have something more, but I'm gonna take a quick water.
My husband is a programmer, and so he works for a company where company culture is very important to them. And to them, that means you need to be able to go and have a beer with them after work. And it's only as these discussions are coming up in the wider like tech industry that I'm seeing that and being all like, as long as people can do the job, like if they want to go home to see their kids or they just don't want to drink with you after work kind of thing, but can still do the job. Why should that be the biggest factor? But you see it so widely of like everyone who runs this company, middle-aged white men, and like they like hiring people that they can chat with, and like even in presidential races, you see people you can have a beer with, that kind of thing of like, shouldn't the skill set be more important?
Right. And I feel like that's still a thing that happens when we go to. It hasn't happened obviously in the last year or two because of the pandemic, but like before that, when you would go to like an E3 or a PAC or a GDC. A lot of like, let's go out and get drinks. Let's go to this bar and we can have discussions there. And it's like a bunch of people just don't drink alcohol, dude. Like, you know what I mean? Like you're putting people in a position that they don't feel like being in. And saying if you don't do this, then you're at a disadvantage. So that's really tough. I feel like we were talking about, Bumpy mentioned, it is on the employers a lot of times to do the work. It's not on people of color or women or LGBT, etc., to instruct us on how we should be behaving.
So it crossed my mind when this topic got brought up of like, are they just going to make me talk on it? I don't want to talk on it.
No, because I've already had that revelation, right? Like, and again, this isn't something that I've just known my whole life. Like, these are revelations that that have some of them more recent than others, right? Like that you have to be taking into consideration. Given your perspective, right? Like given our own personal perspectives, we're going to have different revelations about other perspectives that we didn't have before, or that we just missed out on, or that our society kind of went, pushed down and said, we're not going to talk about it. Like, and now we're kind of digging all that up and saying, no, we do want to talk about it. We do want a level playing field. There are people that want that. There's also a lot of bad actors, like in all walks of this situation we're talking about, that muddle things, that make people that are against diversity say, look at this, and you see, and have fodder constantly to push against the process and such. So that's really frustrating, but that is a natural, like, that's how people work. There will always be parts of society that are looking to take advantage of certain situations, as in the companies, leading into diversity that we talked about and such. So again, there was a point I wanted to get to. It was that when you go out with Indie Brothers, we are mostly white men. We have a couple others that are not identified as that. And that has been something that we've been working on now for a couple of years to try to get away from that. Everyone that applies, like 9 times out of 10 that applies or that we know are interested in a job, is a white male. We have to do the work. We have to go out and find people who are interested. Because, like a Tiny Disaster pointed out, a lot of these folks don't have the confidence to go forward and say and put their hand up and say, yes, I am ready to do this job, because they've faced an industry that has basically said, pushed them away and said, exactly. So again, you don't just hire someone in the process of diversity who's different than you, regardless of what their skill set. You still are like trying to establish someone with a good skill set to join your team. But is it better to give that, if you have, let's say, like 2 people in the same room, one's a white male and one's not, and they have the same skill set, know that white male is going to get the job 9 times out of 10 regardless of the situation. So why not go with the other person? Why not give them an opportunity? You've seen the movie already. We've already seen the movie a million times with the white guy as the hero. We've seen it. Okay,
Yeah.
like it's been done. There's nothing new to learn about it at all.
Yeah. That's
Like,
interesting, just as like gaming as a whole, like it very much started out as like, oh, this is just for boys, blah, blah, blah. But now as the industry has changed and there's so much more diversity in the type of games, especially indie games in particular, women are a huge part of gaming. I think in terms of mobile gaming, women are the bigger audience, and like it is growing in that direction as you get different voices making different games.
and there were women playing shooters the whole time. They just didn't want to say
Yeah.
anything because they didn't want to be harassed.
Yeah,
Like, you know what I mean? Like
true.
there are, I watch streamers now. Some of these girls, they take heads off. I mean, they're amazing. They're super good at what they do and like top notch. And it doesn't matter what, whether they're a man, woman, etc. Whatever. It has nothing to do with it. They're just good at it, and they finally now have a platform and like an industry that at least half accepts their existence. I don't even want to say fully accepts because again, harassment, that kind of stuff is still very prevalent, despite a lot of people being tired of it and like raging against it. There's still a very, very significant subset of the industry or of the populace or however you want to describe it that are willing to come in and just say very, very terrible things, especially to people of color, women, etc. It's and LGBT, etc. Because it is so, you just don't even realize it if you're not going in there and actually to those channels and seeing some of the hate that they have to face and some of the things that they have to overcome. It would put a lot of people out of commission and say, I don't want to do this. I'm not interested in doing this because of that. Like, and so that's what I mean by like employers that have the upper hand already or that have the ability to hire, etc. We need to do the work. We need to go out and actually like make something happen. Something's burning. I'm gonna have to go check on my daughter and stuff.
Okay. All
right.
Sounds like the right move.
Real quick, just going back to something that Cup touched on. You said, like there are strides being made. There are places and companies that try to do, say the right thing. They're trying to,
Oh yeah.
advance, diversity.
They're aware of
not
the
being
issue is a huge part of it.
Now, I've been fortunate enough that my knowledge everywhere that I've worked, it's a couple of I worked for like a single person a couple times, and I mean it was just, it is what it is. But anywhere that actually had groups of people, they've always done a really good job of making sure diversity was going and so on and so forth. Like they would hire women, people of color, and so on and so forth. So I never really ran into that. So to me, that was never. And I grew up in like a school that had all a mix of everything. In Florida, all sorts of different types of people and so on and so forth. So to me, it was never really. I'm like, oh, we're making a lot of progress because I've heard stories in the past and everything else. And then you start looking outside of your bubble, outside of your normal day to day, and you're like, whoa, this is going on still? How is this still, like, it just doesn't make sense to me. I can't actually comprehend people hating people all the time. It's not how I'm designed. It's not how I've been raised.
Right, and it's important, and this is like a really good point, right? It's important for us to comprehend it because it just doesn't make any sense like at first when you think about it, but then when you get the other perspectives, when you get how parents have taught children for better or worse, right? Like in generations,
not even intentionally. Yep.
Right. Like, and it is. I will say that because there is more of a voice behind, I guess it's hard to just say diversity in general, but like the different subsets of like trying to push for diversity, trying to push for humanitarianism, regardless of if it's something that is normal to you or not, that you have been interacting, again, it's just like where as like a society, we have to kind of keep moving forward, but also understand that there's always going to be people who will never understand or will choose to never understand the situation. So, but it's like over the last couple of years, it's been figuring out how best to be an ally for me. That's like and for our company, that's like personally how best to support. It's not getting up on stage by myself and talking about it. That's not right. Like, I mean, that's not the right answer. So, like, what are the ways that we can raise, voices that have more or less been silenced, like over the last, again, this could go on to the beginning of history, right? Yeah. So, that I feel like is like our mission, our call at this point is to give people who have really never been given the opportunity before those opportunities, because we're seeing amazing things come out of it, by the way. It's not just like, oh, do diversity because that's in right now, or that, it's the humanitarian thing to do. It's like, no, I mean, like, look at some of the amazing products and services, et cetera, that have come out of diverse teams.
Yeah. And even just your point of like, let's make something new for a change is really, really valid.
Yeah.
We've done so many iterations on the same thing again and again, so.
Which they'll always be there, right? Because of the status quo, those things will always exist. So instead of, like, again, funneling everything into them, why don't we spread it out a little bit and stuff like that? Because it's, again, you're not losing anything to bring others up. You're still going to have what's already been established, I think, like in a very broad sense of people who are worried about diversity affecting them in a negative way. It's like, it's not. It's really, really not. It's just like before. If you're not into that portion of media or whatever, you don't have to watch it. You don't have to, like, immerse yourself in it. Better on you for doing so, because you'll get a different perspective maybe than you had before. But, like, again, nobody's making you, like, watch these products. No one's or interact with these products. No one's making you go with these services and such.
Yeah, no one's making you pick the female character in Assassin's Creed or whatever game everyone got so upset about a couple years ago.
Right, like,
you can still be the dude. It's fine.
Yeah, and even if you can't, like, who cares? Like, to be honest, if they made a protagonist that's like not what everybody wants, like, it's their game and their protagonist. So like, it's their choice to make, and it is a frustration that we're in an industry in 2021 still, but it is the case where if they make the decision, they're going to have blowback, and it's going to be significant. Like, there's going to be one side that's like, "Are you kidding me?" to the other side, but the other side is still significant. It's not, and what I mean by that is that they have numbers, and they're willing to express themselves, even if they. Even in the face of them looking really bad, like, they don't seem to care. So that's still a thing. That's still a thing that's happening very regularly. You can really check, basically, if you go into the games section or games industry section of Twitter and find one of the top posts. Go
like
check
Gamergate still comes up. It's not like we're not that far past a lot of nonsense.
No, and that's true. And Gamergate's a great example of, like, what the heck? How did this happen after you felt like we had? It's just like, it's that thing that you're going, like, Gamergate is like, what can happen if everybody's just like, we're good, the industry's solid and things are going great and it's diverse and we don't have to do anything else. That's when Gamergate happens. Like, that's when things like that happen, because people are way too complacent about the situation, and then again, they'll take little stories or minor things that have, minor truths, and then twist and turn and pull it into something kind of completely different for their cause. So that will occur at any time that everybody as like a whole or in general is like, yeah, things are good and we don't have any, beep heads in the industry. I was like, God, I don't want to cuss on stream. There's always going to be beep heads in the industry that we have to, kind of account for.
All right, so
that's just the way it is.
I got a couple things. So one of the things that I always or that I run into just being a content creator, you get occasional negative comments, and for the most part, I mean, I don't care. I think most of the time it's just funny that for whatever reason someone's so upset for, I've never personally attacked anyone. Like, what's the deal? But some of them, a bunch of little ones add up and they start hurting you. So like you were saying, there's a lot of female streamers or people of color or so on and so forth that just get nonstop every single time they stream or whatever they're doing, just constant harassment, and that's
hate raids, right?
Terrible. Yeah. And I can't fathom, how they're able to just, handle that. But, good on them that they're able to, because in reality, I mean, they obviously have a bigger audience. That's why these people are doing these things. And it's, thankfully, again, it should be 0%, but it's a tiny percentage of people that are doing it. So hopefully they are able to understand that they have this giant support network of people that are watching them that don't feel that way. So don't let those 1 or 2 or 10 or whatever people that are being just insufferable, nasty, horrible humans get to you. I know that's easy to say and it's really hard to do, but like you have to, you got to this point. You have people that like what you do. Be comfortable in that and don't let the, ignore the haters situation. You have to. You just can't let it, take you down, no matter how nasty and terrible they can be.
Yeah, don't let it take you down, but you don't have to accept it either. Like
Yeah.
you can
Get
you
rid
can
of them
continue to
immediately.
getting rid of them individually and continuing in general to push for
Yep.
this to just go away entirely.
And for
in
the
general.
platforms to, take initiative and make this
Right.
stuff stop happening. Twitch,
Yeah,
YouTube, so on and so forth.
Yeah, Twitch has been under the gun now for a while on this, and they really haven't really seen a whole lot from them in terms of the right decisions and right moves.
At the same time, and I'm not defending Twitch at all. don't get me wrong, but I don't know what the right answer is. I don't know what a company or platform can do. So this is something that people need to think about. And
That's
we're
fair.
gonna move on soon, but
Yeah.
like this is
I
something that you need to think about. Like, well, Twitch needs to do better. All right, well, how would they do better? What can they do?
I think it starts with investment of time. You have to invest more time into this subject matter to get anywhere with it. You can't just be like, well, we'll figure it out because somebody got upset now.
Yeah.
It's too late. Like, it's too late. You don't have any plans.
Yeah. Twitch is making what percentage off of their streaming community? It's their job to figure that out. So
right. It's frustrating, but yeah, again, just the idea of someone has to deal with that on a daily basis, push through it, also fight for advocacy against it. It's just,
it's a lot.
I'm so sorry. It's too much. And I hope it changes. You know what I mean? Like
I do feel like it's headed in the right direction.
Better than it ever has before in terms of none of this stuff is under the rug anymore.
Yeah.
If it happens, it's people are willing to talk about it.
Which
and they're not willing to just say, well, that's just the way it is. If you stream and you're a black streamer, you're going to just receive hate and that's just the way it is. No, that's not okay. Like, you know what I mean? Like I like that there is a clear call to action against that now. We need it because the people on the other end are very staunch and they don't seem to be going away without.
They seem to have so much free time. I don't know.
Yeah.
Exactly. So the pushback needs to be there almost constantly, and it's like fighting a good fight, right? It's going to be going on for a long time, and who knows? It may be even after our lifetimes where things get to a point where we really, 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 really want them to be. But like that's why we make these efforts now. So hopefully, if the world's still alive later, given everything else that's going on in terms of like climate and all that stuff, our generations ahead still have a better world to work with and a better understanding. This like I don't want to get into this too much, but like what's nationalism now? Like what? In 2021, like in global, we're just so global. Like what are you doing? Like the whole nationalism thing. I don't understand it. If pride in your nation, that's different. But just like I don't want to work with anybody else. What?
So,
we've been on the internet for like 25 years now. Like, are you kidding me? Like, it's just longer than that, but still.
So the really, 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 really short point that I want to boil a lot of this down to, and I know this is a massive, massive thing, and more related to games industry alone, is there's other voices out there from places that you haven't been, that you are not around that you're not aware of, and listen to those voices, seek out those voices, and you can only benefit from them. So we'll move on to consistently finding work. I know this was a big, broad, very heavy topic. Consistently finding work will also be, important to you, but a little bit less, a little less heavy, I suppose. So what do we mean by that, Cup?
This is just like from personal experience, like my own, like because we were reading about. I was reading the topic. I was like pitfalls of the industry. What have I dealt with, right? Like what have I faced? And I started out as a journalist and a press writer, and writing for websites, breakdowns of news items and occasional interviews with AAAs, and then eventually that led me into interviewing indie developers since they actually replied to my emails. And then from there, I kind of made my way over to the indie side. But that whole time when I was doing the journalist stuff, it was like, man, I'm not making like anything. Like it was pretty rough. It was like a very low amount of money. And I was working a different job for a marketing firm at the time, which they did have me as their games writer, but I also was doing like 7 other things for the job as well. So that was like one of those things where, like you mentioned, Bumpy, you had to get by. You try to stay within the industry if you can. But if you can't, you just take the job that you can to get yourself to continue on your industry stuff.
You have to make money to live.
Right. But then eventually you get to a point maybe where you get a full-time job in the industry, which is what happened to me with Arcen. And it was like, cool, my bills are taken care of by this full-time job. It's going to be like this forever and ever and ever. Nothing's going to change. And then, 3 years later, something changed. And we were in a position where I couldn't, well, actually, it wasn't even Arcen's fault. I just had kids. I mean, to be honest, like I had to make more money than I was making at the current job. If I was
fault.
If I was an individual by myself, I probably would have been content where I was and stuff in the current situation. But knowing that, there was new challenges in my life that, financial challenges that I needed to address, that led me to, have to strike out and get other work and such. And so at no point over the last, 2021? Over the last like 7 years have I not had, less than 2 jobs.
Yeah.
Like, and sometimes I've had like more than that even, but like, but usually Indie Brothers, I always count as 1 job. But if you think about it, a lot of times it's like 10 jobs if you're doing like 10 clients at the same time, which can occur. It doesn't happen that much, and we're smart about that most of the time nowadays. But back in the day, where we were like, whatever, we'll take it. You know what I mean? Like, we'll do it. And that was times where you found out about yourself, like, oh gosh, there is a level of this that's too busy that you can't do the quality for it and stuff. Let's get off topic. My point is that I never stopped looking kind of for work until Indie Brothers got 5 years in as a company, because the first 5 years of a company is always like, ugh, like super, are we even going to make it? Is this worth it? Year 3 or 4, you're like, why am I even doing this still? And then year 5 happens and some breakthroughs happen. This doesn't happen for everybody, right? But this is like a standard company startup kind of like process. And then I made the move to get out of my own way financially for my company. So if I was making full-time money for my company, the company had to make, X amount more than it would if I was only, sort of a, consultant, CEO, chairman of the board, whatever you want to call it. And that's when I got that job with Vertigo as their production manager. And at this point, that has sustained me because the company has continued to be successful. That is not a normal thing in like games industry, right? Like, it's not necessarily like a typical thing for like a studio to have a 5 to 10 year run without any major financial issues come up. And I'm lucky in that regard, fortunate at least, that Vertigo and the developer that started Vertigo Gaming came out with Cook Serve Delicious 1 when he did. It sold as much as it did, and it established sort of a baseline for the company to work off of, be able to take risks, make new games, etc., and not bury themselves. So all that's to say is that, if you want to keep working in the industry, you have to know when pivots are going to need to happen, either because you want to pivot or because you have to pivot. Because maybe the job just ends. A lot of the jobs in the industry are gigs, are like timed, right? Like, or have a time limit to them. It's like a seasonal thing, or in the AAA aspect, I had a lot of people who worked as testers, friends in LA that worked as testers, and as soon as the game is complete, they are terminated at that point. And then hopefully that studio has another game where they can get rehired. It's like,
and you look at that for most like programmers, artists, music, of like, there's a finite point where you're needed in any game. So if you're in a studio where they can just move you to a different project, but that is not going to be most jobs.
Right. It's not a common thing. And that's why I think that's why despite how difficult indie development is, running your own indie studio is, and we've discussed this ad nauseum to this point over the last like several episodes, it's still super appealing because of that. You know what I mean? It's still super appealing that you can, that you don't have to, you can finish your game, and as long as it made the money that you needed to make it, you can, as a studio, stay together and move forward onto the next game. Now, this is something that's very, it takes initiative, work, and talent and results to make happen. So that's all to say, like, I've been through a process myself where if I would have gotten discouraged at points, you know, A, B, C, D to where I'm at now in X, Y, Z, etc., I probably would have gotten to the end of the alphabet, like where I'm at here. That's a terrible analogy. But like, my point is that I would not have gotten more stable work if I had said, well, this job is now dissipating. This financial or this revenue stream for me is now going away. And now I have to just basically leave the industry or go outside of it, or I'm going to leave the industry and not come back, which is what a lot of people do, as opposed to saying, I'm going to get a job outside of the industry to support my efforts inside of it, which we talked about before. That's something that's like a personal choice, right? It's going to be a personal thing for you to decide if your back's against the wall, how you're going to proceed forward on that front. So again, it's very anecdotal, and I apologize for that. I don't have like specific, like, you know, this works for everybody, that kind of stuff, but I don't think it's that kind of thing anyway.
Yeah, I think this is more of it's a cautionary tale. You look at a lot of even new companies that are starting up, and they're, you know, almost every new developer that you see, that even indie developers, they have previously worked on this title, that title, and so on and so forth. You have to imagine that the vast majority of those people didn't want to leave the studio that they were working for. Some did, sure, but most of them wanted to keep working with that studio, but there just wasn't a place for them. They moved on to a game that maybe they weren't the right fit for, or there was a big lull between this, and there was like a development process that maybe the artwork wasn't needed, or they wanted to go in a different direction. So this is just an industry-wide thing that you may find your dream job at one point, but you have to be ready to see, you know, a new opportunity arise as another one, you know, as one door closes, a window opens, or what have you. So
yeah, and it's the reality of the industry, but it's also like every time you complete a project, you have that much more leverage for your next attempt or next gig and job, and that's something that you have to let buoy you, because it can be a little daunting to go, oh, I have to now find a way to get from point A to point B where I didn't know how I was going to before. So
yeah, that's like the encouraging part of, like, it does get easier. Like, so many jobs are looking for ship titles, so the more of those you have under your belt, the better you're going to look, the more likely it is you'll get in for an interview. You're always building your portfolio and showing people what you can do, so it gets easier. It's just never easy.
no, I mean, but that again, if it's part of your process, and you're willing to do that process and it doesn't affect you negatively, then you've gotten to a point where I think that you can really make it. Where you're not going, oh, when you stop rolling your eyes at what you have to do, right?
Yeah.
Like what has to be done, but you go, no, I understand this is part of what I signed up for.
So this is this whole point is more of a cautionary tale. It's possible you find a specific company you want to work for, you hook up with them, and you work with them forever and ever and ever, and that's great. Even on my side of things, I see like NIS America, for instance, pretty big company. They've gone through. I think I've been working with for 4 or 5 years now. They've gone through like 5 PR people that they have in house, and that's actually very big turnaround. I haven't seen anybody else that's quite that much, but I see PR people come and go all the time, and again, a lot of them move to other companies doing the same thing, but it's all throughout the industry. So just be aware, like I said, cautionary tale, and I think that's pretty much all we need to say about it. You guys ready to move into our final point for today?
Let's do it.
All right, we're going to be talking about, and this is going to be a bit more, I guess, game developer or indie developer centric in general. So this is a pitfall. It's not enough pre-release runway to work with. So you don't quite give yourselves all the time and energy and effort that you need to get forward. Maybe energy and effort's not the right call, but what do we got, Cup?
It's planning in the end, right? It's a planning thing, I think. And it's, again, like we talked about with some of the diversity things, there are things in place in our mind and our psychology that says this is the way things work, when that's not actually true. And in this case, it's like, this is going to take this amount of time, when that's probably not actually true. You know what I mean? Like, you have to actually be really critical of your assessment of project schedule. And a lot of people just don't. We'll talk about this as a different point on another episode. Again, these industry pitfalls. When you say industry pitfalls, where you're like, well, there's streamer pitfalls, there's YouTuber pitfalls, there's game developer pitfalls, there's all these different types of things that we could go over. So this is we have a lot of things to touch on and stuff. But sorry, I lost my train.
We're essentially just taking a slice out of each of these things, but yeah, it's not enough pre-release runway.
Right. So the big issue here is that a lot of times you're not tying in marketing and PR into your game development process. Like, you're saying, okay, we're going to get to the gold portion of our game. When a game's, you guys know the term gone gold. Essentially, when the game is feature complete or actually entirely complete, ready for release beyond some final testing for bugs, maybe certification through like Switch or whatever, to get to know that it's actually ready to go out and doesn't have any game breaking bugs that are keeping it back. That's like kind of going gold. So a lot of people think, oh, when I go gold, I'm going to release the game like tomorrow, the day after, or like in a week from that point. Whenever I get the go ahead to do that, and they don't actually take it to consideration. No, that's actually when you're going to have like you hopefully set a period of time of at least a couple months to now be able to put your best foot forward with the assets you have, since your game is feature complete, since it is gold, since it's not going to have any major changes to it. Now you can go extra hard on the marketing and make those efforts and all that kind of stuff. The problem is when someone's like, well, it's like let's look at right now, like the date, October 20th. Okay, every day that ticks right now is a more anxiety-driven thing for indies as we get closer to November, and then Christmas December, season, which is almost too late at that point to even make a release. There's a lot of AAAs now that are coming out in November and January, or in November, December, and there's now a general consensus about February being the most terrifying month in games industry history in terms of releases. They've said pray for PR people. If you're an indie developer, avoid it entirely. Like, they're like straight up, like, there's just a lot of prognosticators about February being like, this is going to be an absurd February in terms of how many AAAs are going to be pulling attention, trying to pull different attention and stuff. So, thinking about all that in mind, you're trying to balance like giving yourself enough runway, but not also launching at a really bad time. But it can happen the other way, where you're like, oh, well, we got to get out before this. And it's like, but you didn't give yourself enough runway. We have done this with clients many times before, where we're like, they were anticipating that they were going to release in October.
Yeah.
And then when they realized that's not the right move, it actually got moved
March.
To the following March. Yeah. Exactly. Correct. Right. So like, you have to understand the calendar and how that plays for you and against you. There are little pockets a lot of times, in those busier periods that are really what you're looking for. You don't necessarily want to release in July when everybody's like, it's summer in the Northern Hemisphere and everybody's out out and about. I know streamers and YouTubers see lower numbers in the late summer, usually period, like July and August and such. A lot of people just take breaks entirely from like working during that time, like for their content creators, because they're like, the numbers aren't going to be there or not as good. So you have to figure out, like, obviously fall's a great season, right? When people get back into school, when kids are back in school and such, universities are back hopping again. Releasing a game in September, October is usually like a really good spot for indies, as long as you're not running into, like, we'll often like look at other releases that maybe aren't AAA, but like, you're like, that's the same kind of genre, or same theme, and they're doing better than us, so we don't want to release on the same day as they're, like, as far as their pre-release goes. You're going, oh man, they have way more social media, etc. Why try to compete with them on the same day that they're going to release? It makes no sense. So But with the runway, it's just about I'm on the marketing side and the PR side a lot of times, but going from just the game developer perspective, you need to be able to plan how long it's actually going to take to develop your game, and you need to make sure that you have contingencies to that plan to that extend that make it go out longer, or the schedule this makes the schedule like kind of extend, because you might get to a point where you discovered something about your game that you didn't know before in the development process. Halfway through, you find a new mechanic, or maybe you wanted to change art styles out of nowhere, not out of nowhere, but something that you learned through the process, right? That adds, appreciable time that you have to take into consideration.
Yeah,
You can't
that's what I thought of when we're talking about runway, of like people planning for, this is when we can get the game done. If everyone works at peak efficiency the entire time, we never want to change anything, and it all goes exactly according to plan.
Right, exactly. Don't do that
So
ever.
you would suggest doing like checkpoints and pivoting your release date based on where you're at. That would make sense to me.
And keeping that release date internal until you decide,
Yeah.
or until we know
Truly
100% that we're going to be able to hit the release window. You don't give an exact date. I think right away you give a release window, knowing, hey, we're going to be able to get the release date figured out within
usually a year, then you move it to a quarter. Usually, is what I see. Then to a month.
Or any combination of those where you feel like, hey, we will be able to hit the game release within that time frame.
Yeah, you start.
And then after you might have platform partners that make a difference in terms of your exact release date. Like maybe Xbox says, well, we typically release indies on this day, that kind of thing. So you want to make sure that you have that figured out. And you can, and again, you don't necessarily have to just fall into what the platform holders say. If you want to release a game on a certain day, that's probably okay. But just know that it might not be optimal for that platform, or the platform might say, no, you can't. You have to release on this day. And it's like, okay, well, then unfortunately your audience gets the game a couple of days later than the rest. That can happen, and it's unfortunate, but it's the way you got to go. So
it's been interesting for me coming from publishing. It's like that's been one of the few things that's been dramatically different. Of like in publishing, on the traditional level, your publishing date is set more than a year in advance.
Right.
Whereas like coming into seeing some indie games of like, they'll be out at some point this week, we're not quite sure yet. Like it's been really strange of they're just kind of gonna wing it. So having that flexibility is nice. It's just, as a consumer, it's been odd for me of like, but why don't you know when I can have this?
Right. I suppose with I don't know, maybe it's not the same, but I suppose with writing, there's less of a technical standpoint, right? It's you write something, and then it gets edited, and then you change what you need to edit, and you change the writing. Whereas from a game, you go along, and all of a sudden, I change one line of code, and the whole game is broken. What happened? And stuff like that pops up. You don't really have that.
Publishing also works way more in advance of like, the author has finished the book a year before the book comes out. It's still going through later stages of editing, but like the big changes are locked in.
Yeah, so it's like
more than a year out.
It's like typo catching, stuff like that, punctuation or whatever.
And they're very much timing by genre for different times of year, more than like, so you were always going to come out in a summer if you're this kind of book, and there's less flexibility there. So there's so much runway that it's kind of awful from an author standpoint, but from an industry standpoint, they have a lot of time.
And
ideally, right? That'd be the ideal situation, but
and from the consumer side, it's about it's the developer's responsibility to make sure that they are putting out the right information publicly and not having to like roll constantly walk back what you already put out there. That's a good community management pitfall to avoid. So but like honestly, like community management and community building is definitely tied to your ability to be accurate with the things that you put out there publicly, to the best of your ability. Do delays happen all the time? Like, is it okay to happen like once in a situation like that where everybody's really anticipating the game? Yeah, totally, that's fine and stuff. But you definitely are forming a pattern, and it's a bad perception. I feel like if you get into, okay, we said it was going to be this, but it's not. okay, that next one we said that is not going to happen either. That's just setting up, like, it's just bad precedent, bad, kind of like, just perception for people coming in and saying, you know, how professional and how reliable. I mean, professional
Yeah.
is kind of whatever. How reliable are these developers is what
Yeah.
really matters to a lot of the consumers that are saying, should I take a leap into to their product and try out their product or not?
It's funny because today is such a good example of like we found out very last minute that we were going to have to start late, and I wanted to just like take back my last tweet right away and like say something very quickly, but I waited for a couple of minutes to make sure I wasn't going to have to push it again. Of like, what are we 100% confident in?
Right.
We can show up at this time. So you just take a minute, breathe. Stuff comes up. It happens. Find ways to be forthcoming, but not be that person who's constantly, wait, no, I meant 10 minutes after this, or it's going to be October or November.
Yeah,
That gets me.
pick your spots. Yeah, definitely don't be someone who's just putting things out there all the time and being like, I may have been a bit premature in putting that out there. Yeah, well, don't do that. Make sure that what you're putting out there, it feels on time. And if you don't feel like you have that skill yet, then get it, practice it, like make it work for you. Make a fake Twitter and that doesn't exist. And post on it and be like, wait a second, looking back on this isn't actually true, and then call yourself out. You probably won't have to go to that extreme, but I'm just telling you, you better have that in you. You better have that skill set.
When in doubt, finish the game and then talk about it. Like, get finished and then set a date so you give yourself the runway for marketing. If you're not sure, do the game first and then worry about it.
Yeah.
What are the other issues that you have when you're constantly pushing the game release date back is people are usually accepting of like one time, right? You missed a window or whatever, or there's something that happened that you had to change. But like the more that you delay it, the more that you come back and say nope, the more rabid the fan base, especially if they're really after the game. And we know of a recent example. I mean, I don't want to call them out, but it's industry wide. Everybody knows, Cyberpunk 2077. That was probably the most nightmare release out of almost any game ever. They released it unfinished, just not ready, and it's because people were like threatening the developers and all these horrible things. And it's like, look, you complain about the game when it comes out because it's not finished, yet you're threatening people to release the game that's not finished because you want to play. Like, you can't have it both ways. Just calm down.
Yeah.
Everybody needs to calm down.
And CD Projekt Red has to do a better job in terms of their scheduling, their planning, and what they put out there, because that was what came back to bite them.
Yeah,
it isn't necessarily fair that the things that were thrown at them.
Yeah,
but
I agree.
They also were forced into a way not optimal situation by putting out a game that wasn't ready yet. Yes, it sold. Yes, they were able to get by through that project, that kind of thing. But the perception and of their company going forward has been affected. And so it is something to just kind of keep in mind when you're ready to put yourself out there. Kind of that you gotta know when the right time is, and you got to be kind of assured about it.
Because the flip side, like mainstream example, is the Sonic movie of like as they got really close to release, and all the testing was like, no, this is terrible. Please change the animation on Sonic. And so they were upfront about it, and it was better for it. Everyone was like, yep, you're right, that's bad. So.
That has to be like that part what we talked about before, where you're parsing information and feedback from testers and such. Which stuff is actually like, this is like kind of a general consensus, and I feel like they're onto something here. You really want to take that into consideration, that like, even though I would have normally not considered this, maybe I will make a major change in this department, and it will be for the better, like you said, with Sonic.
Yep, I agree. So I would be very interested in reading or seeing if they want to do a video format or what have you, as maybe a year down the road, CD Projekt Red talking about the release and all the stuff that led up to it, and just kind of see what the whole picture is versus, of course, the little news snippets here and this and that and so on and so forth. Because I think there's probably a very interesting story there, and again, hopefully they are able to recover and bounce back from it. I know a lot of people are big fans of their games. And it sucks that just one bad situation can potentially taint your company for years to come. So,
well, and I think also that while Cyberpunk, CD Projekt Red is not necessarily officially a AAA, they're closer to AAA than an indie studio. They have way more team members. than an indie studio, a typical indie studio that we would think of it as like, you know, kind of like an indie studio it would be. And I know that making changes and pivots when you have larger team size, and probably CG Project Red has investors, which we do, which most of these studios would never have. These things can affect things, right? Like these situations can really stop the proper things that need to happen. These proper changes that need to occur can sometimes be halted because not everybody's on the same page, which we've talked about before, or even earlier on in this episode, is that sometimes if your company can't get on the same page together, then you could run into these issues as well. There may have been someone in the room in game, Tiny Disaster, screaming, "Don't let this scene happen," but it wasn't enough.
Yeah.
There was too many people that were like, it's gotta go forward. You know what I mean?
Too.
And so.
Yeah, people answer to sometimes. Yeah.
It is nice. You know, one nice thing about being an indie studio is that if you're doing it right, there's 5 to 10 people in the room, maybe tops, and they're not all just yesing you. Like there are clear, obvious, like this. You know, we need to discuss this, or I know you like this, but I think you really need to consider the general perspective on it. That kind of stuff. It's important to have those kind of conversations. So anyway.
I think
yeah,
that's pretty much it for us today. We'll probably do a part 2 of this, not next week, but maybe the week after, because again, real life happens, and sometimes things do get delayed, like today. So we'll do another, maybe like a shorter one, come a week and a half, or maybe we'll come up with a couple extra points to fill it out.
And ultimately, we just ended up seeing that we had more. The points we had were going to take up a certain amount. We had more and all that. So understood. Yeah, and then. Yeah, we have our schedule for next week, and then we're working right now on our schedule for the remainder of the year. So we'll get that.
So for next week, we should have that.
Yeah. So next week we'll be talking about why were these games successful. We've done a discussion on this before, but now that we're starting to chronicle and put it up on YouTube so the VODs stay permanently, we're just gonna name it that. It's probably like a part 2 or 3 at this point, but.
I think it'll just be kind of a repeating thing, because you can always learn from different games, and there's always going to be games for us to play with.
Yeah, we might just call it that, and you just check the dates. I don't know.
Probably like
do part 1.
Yeah, by like Steam mini reviews, it's going to happen.
Yeah.
Again, if anyone in chat would like to suggest a game for us to look at, please mention it in chat, or you can mention it on
Indie Bros
at our
PR.
Twitter. Yeah, on our Twitter, Indie Bros PR. Tweet at us if you want to see us go over a certain game, potentially. Yeah, we'll have to look at it and see if that fits the requisites that we're looking for. But that's what we're going to be doing the rest of this week, I believe, is figuring out the games that we want to talk about during next week. Tiny Disaster, Bumpy might actually have a few in mind already. I'm not sure, but we will find out, and we're looking forward to next week.
And bonus points to anyone who can find a super successful indie game that you want us to talk about, because
that's.
The door's open to AAA, indie, whatever it is. It's just game industry in general. So,
yeah, we'd like to obviously touch different examples, different circumstances for those examples. Good to know, because we already talked about this ad nauseum, that every situation is different, every circumstance, every game, product, etc. has its own kind of thing going for it, and its own set of circumstances that has to be dealt with.
All right, well, that's going to do it for us, folks. Hopefully you had a good time. We get to talk about all sorts of stuff, some of it heavy, some of it a little less so, but hopefully good information all across the board. Again, next week, why were these games successful? Feel free to hit us up on Twitter at IndieBrosPR with any of your suggestions for that. And until next week, I've been your host, Bumpy McSquigums, joined by Cupogoodness and Tiny Disaster. We'll see you guys next week.